Hello.
We are here. It's Wednesday afternoon.
It is that.
And we're going to talk about the
Quarter
elusive
inch.
quarter inch.
It's so hard.
It's so hard, yeah.
I mean, is there such thing as a quarter inch? Oh, wait. Yes, there is.
It is a measurable thing. It's on our rulers and everything.
Is there such thing as a scant quarter inch?
Not really.
I mean, I know it's in a lot of patterns.
Yes.
And you can highly offend somebody if you tell them there is not a scant quarter inch. But the reality is that is not an actual measurement of anything.
It isn't. It's not something we can consistently measure
from one.
And it's very variable.
Mm-hmm. You know, do you mean an eighth of an inch under a quarter inch? Do you mean just on the inside of my quarter inch?
Right.
It's so there's no measurable piece to have that.
So
the main thing is that it's consistent from the beginning of your project to the end of your project.
Yes, that is the main thing. So I made a little PowerPoint presentation. I know that surprises you.
I get that.
Yep. Can you put that up there for us? I think
No.
if you just, I know the mouse is a little weird, isn't it? So go to it's already in the screen,
okay.
like that one.
That one. Ding,
There we
ding.
go.
Let's perfect that quarter inch seam.
Yes.
It's not hard, but
it
at the
is
same
not.
time it is.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true. I found a definition for scant.
Did you?
I did.
Oh, is it on this one?
It is.
Oh, look at that. I can even read that.
I know, right? It's not too bad today.
Oh, got new glasses. That helps.
So a scant quarter inch seam allowance is one of those things. It's a challenge because it's specifically designed to be slightly less than your quarter inch. And I think part of the reason is that we don't know why. Like, why can't it just be a quarter of an inch? And where is the scant coming from and what is going on with that? Basically, we've derived the version of scant because we are trying to find a word to take up that we have thread and fabric in our seam.
Right.
And that takes up some of the space.
So if you're measuring a quarter of an inch and you actually stitch a quarter of an inch over, when you press it open, do you still have a quarter inch?
That is the question.
And that's where the nuts and the bolts become issues.
Yes. Different fabric, different threads, different ways of pressing your seam.
Right. Am I pressing it open to the right, to the left, to the...
It makes a difference, and it's always variable. And that is the part that becomes super frustrating, is where does this word scant come from, and how do we work with it? Like, what does it mean? What am I trying to do? How do I get there? Because I can't tell anybody a definitive, it's one click to the left. It's always going to be one click to the left, or it's one click to the right. I try not to use the word scant, and I try to explain to people, let's measure. What we want to get is we want to sew 3 pieces of fabric together, and we want the inside measurement to be
a quarter of an inch from each side less than where we started.
Exactly. And if we get that,
it doesn't matter what your measurement of your actual seam is, as long as what it's taking out of the project is the quarter of an inch.
Exactly.
And that is what the actual goal is.
That is the goal.
Not get your ruler and measure from your thread to the edge of your fabric.
Because it
doesn't necessarily matter.
No. And it can be right on a quarter of an inch. And let's be real, right? Our rulers are not always the same. And especially when we're measuring in a small quarter of an inch. If you have this is a new ruler. If you have a well-used ruler,
your edge could be chipped up from your blade.
Your edge is probably very chipped up, and it can actually be a blade's worth less
because of how much has been chipped off.
Yes. Can you click the little
and maybe only in parts of it too. And so I mean, I got
and the comment.
It's just flying. We got to turn down the
thing.
The zoom.
There we go. Yes. Good afternoon,
Hi,
Jane. So, so we're going to talk a little bit about different ways that you can maintain a consistent
stitch
seam
throughout
allowance.
Whatever your project
That's
is.
right. And hopefully when we write a pattern with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and we can stop getting hung up on how much of a scant and what isn't and what isn't and what is and all of those different things. And we can just count on, we just know. We know that we've done our test, we know it's going to be consistent, and our blocks are going to measure what they're supposed to measure. That's the goal.
That sounds like a good goal.
Doesn't that sound like a great
today
goal?
we have some fabric pieces, we've got a ruler, and we've got some tools that are supposed to help you do that
Yes.
consistently.
Yes.
So should we jump in?
We should. I have another page.
There's more than one page to your slideshow. So how do we do that?
Yeah.
So
Let's talk about that.
look at that. I even kind of
Yes.
did the same colors as you.
It's like movie magic over here.
Mind you, I didn't even know she made this, so I had no idea what color fabric to grab. I think that's pretty good.
Pretty good. So we have some fabric strips over here, and Lisa cut them 2.5 inches by 6.5 inches.
Except they're 7 inches because that I was out of time.
Oh,
So,
okay,
but
that's
they
fine.
are 2.5 wide. I promise that part.
So the length doesn't really matter. The reason that I usually do that is
So
because
you end up.
we usually are using like a 6.5. If I was using an 8.5 inch ruler, I'd probably make them 8.5. That way I could just lay my
You could
block.
check the square.
Yeah, it's so much easier than trying to do it any other way, and it's quicker, and again, it's just more.
I mean, I can run back over there and do it,
No,
but
it's fine.
I ran out of time, so I.
So that's what we usually do. And like I said, the measurement of the length of it doesn't really matter. Use the length of whatever it is you're going to be measuring, because that's going to make it just that much easier for you. Really, I mean, let's not make it hard, right?
No, we don't like hard.
No, it shouldn't be.
I don't like hard.
So, really, what we're going to do is we're going to sew these 3 strips together. I usually use the same fabric that I'm going to be working with my project with.
Because that can change based on your fabrics.
Yes.
It can also make a difference whether you've pre-starched or not pre-starched and all of those things. So your test should equal whatever you're actually going to be sewing.
Yeah. So same thread, same fabric. And it doesn't really matter, again, what this ends up being or the size that it ends up being. You just need to be able to measure it. That's all. So we're going to sew 3 pieces together on the sewing machine. So it doesn't even matter if you have them right sides or wrong sides together. It's not going to matter. I'm going to put them right sides together and sew them.
Good habit, but
but honestly, it's your test, so it's not that big of a deal one way or the other. So I have. I'll talk a little bit more about what we have set up with the machine, but I have the machine set up with our standard J-foot. I'll explain to you why I like the J-foot in a little bit. But this is what I'm going to be using, and I'm going to line my fabric up to the edge of my foot, and I have my needle position moved over, and
can I do that? Nope. I was going to try to get that one.
Oh, go to the screen to the left. That one.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, sorry, to left. That one. Okay, so I have the foot here. This is the standard J foot. The fabric is lined up on the right side of this. I know you can't see that. You'll have to trust me. And I'm gonna stitch.
It's just purring. Look at that.
Woo. Okay, and then I'm going to sew the other piece on, and then we're going to measure. Okay. All right, that's super riveting, right?
No, I'm just laughing.
Oh,
because
at the door, yeah.
It was revolving, yeah.
So I have these 3 pieces stitched together. Now I need to make a decision now, like how am I gonna press this? Am I gonna press my seams to one side or the other, or am I gonna press my seams open? Because that will matter. I typically press my seams to one side or the other. So for this one here, I'm going to press them towards the outside. You could definitely press them to the inside. If you were following the press to the dark rules, we would press them towards the inside.
Or sometimes the pattern that you're
Tells you.
working with will also give you a specific indication of, this pattern is going to need you to do this way and that way and so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that you have
Okay, give me just a
plan
second. We
to work
don't typically do
whatever
returns.
specific type
So,
of pattern that you are going
give
to
us
be
just
sewing.
1 second and I will send.
So Sarah's run
Lisa over.
and she is pressing them like we talked about.
Okay.
Do we need something?
Yeah, Tony, he has a ruler she wants to return. He doesn't know how to do a. Okay, so
Do you know what it is?
it's a little 1.5 inch one. She has her AC. It looks like it's still in the package. All right, so here is my fabric strip. You can see that I pressed it. Okay. And now the moment of truth. Let's measure. So I've got my ruler here and I want to place this on the fabric and measure. So let's see if I can zoom in past the glare. There we go. So this ruler is a little bit confusing. I've got a line here for 1 inch and a line here for 1 inch. So I'm just placing that right over top of this. And I'm actually probably just a little bit, just a tiny bit off. There is a little bit of yellow showing along this edge here, which means I made my seam allowance just a hair too big. Or when I was stitching, I had my fabric pushed in too much or something like that. So I'm going to make a small change on the machine and I'm going to sew the next 2 pieces together and we're going to try that again and see if we can get it. Now, I am definitely being very particular here because it was very, very close. And honestly, I probably could have pressed that out and made it work. But if I were making a big quilt and I have a lot of seams that I'm going to be working on, the last thing that I want to be doing is worrying that over the course of these blocks, that a little bit starts to add up and suddenly my 7-inch block is 6.5-inch blocks or so on. And it just becomes one of those things that is pretty consistent and very annoying. So I am gonna try again.
Where'd we end up?
I was a little big in my seam allowance. So my fabric was,
It was not 2 inches in the middle.
it was not, it was just
bigger.
shy.
Your seam was a little big.
Yes. Okay. It also helps when you sit in front of the machine.
Imagine that.
Depending on the angle that you're sitting at, it can really make a difference in where the fabric is actually sitting underneath the foot.
So maybe you talked about this, and I apologize if you did. You can just tell me shut up. You're using the edge of your J-foot.
I am using the edge of the J-foot.
But the way I use the edge of the J-foot may be different than the way you use the edge of the J-foot. So
That is right.
sitting down and saying, well, this is the perfect one, put your needle at this, doesn't necessarily mean anything when going from one person to a different person.
Correct.
Because we don't all sew the same.
We do not. We don't sit at the machine the same way. We don't look at the same way. So, if I'm sitting a little bit more to the left, I'm
Probably going to
gonna
have that fabric going a little more to the
to
right.
the right. Yeah, if I'm sitting a little bit more to the right, I might be doing a little bit more to the left. So that can vary just a little bit, which again can make a big difference. Maybe not in a single block, but definitely
over a whole project.
right. If you have one of those blocks that has like, 90 pieces in it, it's definitely going to make a big difference over the entirety of your quilt.
And so what we mean is, if you are literally using the edge of the foot as your guide for your fabric, maybe I have a little more tucked under the foot. So the way I'm looking at it might not have any fabric at all coming out the right side. You can't see anything, no fringe pieces of the little bits that come off the edge. Or maybe I like to see just a hair of fabric so that I can keep that consistent. So you can make that choice, but then you can also move your needle position to reflect whatever your choice is.
Yes. And the other thing that can make a difference is the ruler that you're using. So if this isn't the ruler that you put all of your, like you cut your fabrics with, or that you planned on using for everything else, it can definitely make a difference. Okay, so I am now really spot on here. So
that looks darn good.
I am right in
the sweet spot.
The sweet spot there. So that did make a little bit of a difference. Since these two fabrics are just a little bit, it's going to be really hard to notice the difference, but there is just a tiny bit of difference right here in this area here. Like I said, it's very, very tiny. It's very hard to see, but this fabric ended up being just a tiny bit smaller underneath. Now, if I were to measure the seam here, it actually almost looks like the seam allowance is a little bit larger here, depending on where I put it on the fabric here. But when we measured from the top, it was measuring the correct size. And then I usually concentrate more on the center block here, because to me, that's a better representation of what is actually going to be happening when I'm sewing and I'm pressing. But then you can also measure the whole block to see where you're at. And again, it does help if you are on top of the block. And there we are at our 6.5 inch. So we've got 2 1/4, 2 1/4, and 2, and that is how we got our 6.5 there. So just making those small changes in your needle position can make a big difference. And the irony is, the person who sat at this machine and did the last 1/4 inch, I'm at the actual default setting, so which is 5.5 on the machine here. When we go into the quilting menu, we have a little bit more wiggle room. We can make smaller incremental changes. So the person who was sitting here before had actually moved the needle position just 1 click to the right, and that is really what made the difference in that seam. Again, it has a lot to do with visually where you are sitting and looking at the foot. Some people look at the edge of the throat plate. Some people look at the edge of the foot. I do think sometimes it is the foot too. Like I think that I have, like my 2 J feet that I have, I think sometimes they're just a hair different in size. And so when I move like from one machine to another machine, I'm not necessarily taking my foot with me,
right?
But I'll be like, oh man, I'm doing exactly the same thing.
I was right where I was last time. What's going
on? So Jane has a really good question. Do you do this every time you sew blocks together? I do this at the beginning of every project, because it's the only way that I can make sure that I am being consistent. Now, I typically sew with a similar style of fabric and a similar style thread.
Right.
But what doesn't always, what changes more frequently now is whether or not I am pressing my seams open or if I'm pressing to one side. When you press your seams open, it doesn't take up any space anymore.
Right.
So now you need more of a traditional 1/4 inch seam rather than the scant 1/4 inch seam, because there's really nothing in there that is getting
Taking up extra space.
It's not taking up any space. It's just there, and it's really not doing that. So I try really hard not to mix pressing my seams open and like to one side.
In the middle of a project.
Right. But if I am going to be doing that, I will do a test at the beginning of my project and write down where I should move my needle position, so that if I, because I typically know, like, this is the part of the block that I'm going to start making maybe it's flying geese or whatever, and it's just easier to get these seams to lay open. I know that's the part that I'm working on, so I can just make that change. Now, if I am, sometimes you don't have to be this
as precise.
Right. You don't have to be this anal about it. I mean, I don't really know what other word to say about it, right? You don't have to be like
But the reality is different patterns do have different necessity of specificity.
Yes.
Specific, you know what I mean?
Yes.
That's
I'm not even going to try to say that. I'm just going to take a drink of water.
Go, that one.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have 12-inch blocks that are literally just 12-inch blocks that you're sewing to another 12-inch piece of fabric to another 12, and it's just a grid. It's just you're making a checkerboard.
Right.
Super simple. It's not going to matter like it is if you're doing tiny squares that all have to add up when you get finished, and your 12 little tiny 1-inch things have to equal 12 inches when you're done.
Yes.
All of a sudden, it matters a whole lot more because there's a lot more room for error. So the actual incremental changes can be more, and it's kind of a trickle-down effect of, oh, crapness.
It is.
The first one, you're like, I can fudge that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, by the time you get down, you started and you fudged a little here, you got to fudge a little more here, and you got to fudge a little more here. By the time you get down,
there's no much fudge.
There's
you ran out. You ate all your fudge.
You can't eat that much.
No.
And pull and pinch, and it just doesn't.
No.
It doesn't work. So. Hello.
Hey, Kathy. Now everything is just becoming more distorted as you're working through it.
So the pattern won't end up looking like you planned.
It will not. And the one thing that I will tell you about quilting is the more you do it, the more you practice good habits, the more those good habits become second nature to you. So you won't really, like, a lot of times I do the test and I'm like, why am I doing it? It's exactly the same, because it builds a steady something that I can duplicate. It makes me more consistent. It also makes me aware of what it is that I am working on.
And you never know the time that you sit down and you're like, holy crap, I got to make an adjustment, because whatever that fabric is, or the thread that you just assume that it's always going to be the same, there's going to be a place that it's not.
Yeah.
And unless you're doing a check,
yes,
you won't know that. Not that I want to get into this a whole lot today, but you can have perfect seams, but if you cut poorly, you will still be fudging by the time you get to the other end of that row or the end of the quilt, because if you don't have the right size pieces that you're putting together, it doesn't matter how perfect your seam is, it also is not going to match up to the way that it's supposed to.
Exactly.
The first time I quilted, we spent an entire class on getting the perfect 1/4-inch seam. We took samples of our pieces just like this. They were smaller, but it's the same concept. We did all of that. She actually had you write with a Sharpie right on your little piece. This was my settings. This is what I used, and put it in your sewing kit.
Yep.
That was what we did. I mean, we're talking a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it's still the same concepts. When it came to cutting, there was no instruction. It was just cut whatever size you need for your pattern.
Yeah.
I had a perfect 1/4-inch seam, but none of it really worked very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because my ruler did one of these things, and I didn't know. It was the first time I'd ever done it.
Exactly.
And so I was like, well, I don't like this.
Right. Yeah.
So it is a combination of things. Just having the perfect seam does not equate to you're going to have a perfect quilt.
No.
I just wanted to throw that. Like I said, we don't need to get all into that, but at the same time, it matters.
But it's very true, because while my experience when I started quilting was slightly different, it was still the same concept. The person who was teaching me how to quilt, she had a tendency to round up certain numbers.
Yes, I remember you telling me that.
And of course, now I understand the concept of math, right? It's we all get that,
Yeah.
2 is not the same as 2.5. But I have no concept of how the quilt block is going. And
The big picture of how it's going to go
right,
together.
And she's giving me the instructions, so I have no idea that they've been rounded up. And so I'm making my block, and it's a star block. And hers is perfect. It's got sharp, pointy stars and everything.
Right.
And I put mine together, and everything is blunt. And I am like,
What
and
happened?
I'm trying so hard, right? I'm going back and I'm double checking my cutting. Did I cut right? What am I doing wrong? I would come home from my sewing class and I would show Dave my block and I would cry. And he was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, it's like
So frustrated.
I'm like, I'm not a stupid person. Like, I don't understand why I can't get the
This
concept
to come out
of
right.
this.
Right.
Of course, I had no idea that the reason that I wasn't being successful is because I wasn't given
Getting the proper numbers to use in the first place.
right. So, when we teach about cutting and we do those types of things, I really encourage people to get to know their ruler because
And your ruler is very important. All rulers are not created equal. There is a
No.
very big difference from one to another. And what's perfect for me may not be perfect for you. And that's okay. That's why there are different ones out there.
Mhm.
But it is extremely important that you understand the, what's the word I'm looking, properties of your ruler. Is it a slippery ruler? Is it a gripped ruler?
Mhm.
If you turn it, what's going to, all of those things, because if you do this, your fabric's going to move with it.
Mhm.
Or if you accidentally do this,
Yep.
everything's going to be off. Or if you push your blade too hard, is it going to slide?
Mhm.
All of those things are going to make a difference.
Yep.
And you have to understand the properties of that ruler.
Exactly. Jane was saying that the best one she ever made was done at a retreat because she only had a limited number of rulers with her, so she wasn't grabbing different rulers.
Different rulers.
It's almost unimaginable to think that a quarter of an inch is not the same on every single ruler, but it really isn't. It also
Well, it's
isn't
even the reflection of where it's hitting, where's the plastic edge reflected
right.
in difference to,
Yes.
maybe the people at the factory had a bad day. I mean,
right.
who
What
knows?
were they
Yeah, I
using?
mean-
Yes. Even when we have like tape measures that we use for clothing, right? They get stretched out.
Yeah.
And people don't think about it. And I mean, I've seen people's rulers that are stretched out by almost like an inch. Boy, does that make a big difference.
When you go to measure and you go get the size, and it's all of a sudden it's not the right
doesn't
thing.
fit. So it really does make a difference. Excuse me. So
Is there more on this?
Yes.
Okay. So Marilyn is asking, so is there really such a thing? So that's kind of where we started, was there is no specific measurement for that, which is why it depends on who you ask. I would say no, there's no such thing as a scant quarter inch. It means less than a quarter inch. That's all that it means. There is no measurement because everybody has a different opinion of what that is. So if you see that in a pattern, unfortunately, it just means less than the quarter inch. So is that a measurable? No. There is no such thing. Should we go back to this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Look at that, I even hit the right button on the
Yay,
first
good
try. So I'm going to pop back here just for Marilyn real quick. This is the best definition we could find for that. So the scant quarter inch is just that elusive randomness there. So outside of less than, there is not going to be, unfortunately, an actual measurement.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's a made up measurement that is variable. It is less than your standard quarter of an inch, which is not something that we can measure consistently.
If we could say it's one click to the left, that sounds great. But one click on my machine is not necessarily going to be the same as one click on your machine. And even in my machine, it depends on what menu I'm in, what one click equals.
Yes.
So there, there's no, unfortunately, measurable,
Right.
Even if the pattern says go one needle position to, that doesn't mean anything either, because
Right.
again,
How big is your needle position?
how big of a, how many positions do you have?
Right.
Do you have 14?
Right.
Or do you have,
5. Yeah.
7? Do you have, I mean,
so different.
It's so different. So unfortunately, I love this.
Yeah.
People seem to obsess about it. You are absolutely right. I don't want to say I got into an argument, but
it always feels like it's a heated discussion.
I made a comment. I'm like, well, there really isn't such a thing. And the person that I said that to was extremely offended.
Yes.
And she's like, you must not be a quilter. And I'm like, I mean, I don't quilt every day, but I'm a quilter. Do you understand math? It's just, how do you, get out of that?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, people definitely do obsess. You are absolutely right, which is why we have covered the quarter-inch theory so specifically.
It definitely feels like it's a hot topic. Is there a particular reason that a pattern would call for a scant measurement? It depends on the person who's writing it. So, different people, it's kind of, I feel like it's become a term of endearment almost. Like
it's like if you're a quilter, you call every quarter inch a scant quarter inch, because it's just what you do.
It's just what you do. So the reason people use the measurement is because honestly, if you sew a 1/4 inch seam, you press your seam and then you measure it and it's a 1/4 inch and your block is still too short, you're going to call the pattern writer, or you're going to write the pattern writer, and you're going to be like, your measurement is wrong, even though mathematically
it should be right.
That's right. I mean, mathematically, if I start with a 2.5 inch strip and I sew 2 strips on the other end of it, mathematically, it has to be 2 inches, because when
you're taking a 1/4 inch off each side.
And so I mean that is math. We math is
math is finite.
Right.
It is what it is.
It is a measurable thing that we can duplicate over and over again. And the reason that I try to give people a way to find something that is duplicatable is because honestly, the first time I said to my husband, who, while he is not an engineer, he definitely
has that brain.
He's the engineer type, right?
Yep.
When I said to him, well, it's a scant 1/4 inch, he's like, what the bleep is that? Like, he's like, can you imagine if you walked over to the guy making an engine and you said, well, I need that to be a scant 3/4 inch bolt? He would be like, yeah, figure it out.
He would be like, I quit. I'm out. I'm not going to be.
Where's that on the ruler?
So it's kind of the same thing of when you go to cut.
Yes.
Like cutting tile. We'll measure it and I'll be like, I need it to be, 5 5/8. And he brings it to me and it's 5.5. And I'm like, he's like, well, I cut on that line. So instead of it being,
it's the blade's width.
It's the blade. He didn't put the blade width in there, so it took the blade width off, and now all of a sudden I lost an eighth of an inch.
Yep.
Because that was the blade. So it's the same concepts.
Yes.
Of when we're pressing and when we're adding thread and things into the seam. It's the same kind of thing when you're actually using a blade and you have to consider the blade width in there.
Right.
So, I learned I just add a 1/4 inch or an eighth of an inch to whatever I tell my husband I need him to cut when we're doing tile, because
then he cuts on.
Then I get it the way that I want. But it's kind of the same concept of a scant.
It is.
It's I'm doing that without telling him I'm doing that.
Exactly. That is exactly it. You find a way to make the measurement when you know
end up being
that's right, because you know the
need.
Materials that you are going to be using are going to take up some of the space.
Yep.
And that's what we're doing. We're finding a measurable way to compensate for the material, whatever that is. If you've got flannel or fleece, gosh, that takes up way more, right? So you're going to need a much smaller seam in order to get an actual 2 inch
finished with 2 inches in the center.
Exactly, because that is just going to take up more space. If you sew with, I sew with 60 weight thread. That's different than 50 weight thread. It's finer. So that's one of the reasons why I sew with 60 weight thread, because it's fine. It takes up less space. It means
You don't have to make as much of an adjustment to
that's
make
right.
things work.
When I sewed with 50 weight thread, which I did for years, I found that I had a harder time being consistent, because when I moved my needle position one click left or right to try to compensate for the
Made a larger adjustment.
it did, and so it didn't make it. Like, and then I was like, okay, I could move my needle position over, but now I also have to adjust where I put the fabric. And so I was like, well, this is just silly. Like,
So
I don't want my brain to hurt this bad.
there is no one, yes, you put your needle here, you put your fabric here, and it's magically going to work. It does, all of those things have to work together to get that final. And what really matters is the final measurement of that center piece of fabric.
That's right.
What the actual seam on the back measures out to really doesn't matter.
No.
As long as that center piece ends up at 2 and your total piece ends up at 6.5.
That's right.
And that's really what it boils down to. So whether it's scant, whether it's fat, whether it's,
Right.
that's not really relevant. It's going to become different based on the fabrics and threads that you're using.
Exactly.
And that's really where it's coming down to. So this is just a way to make sure that no matter what, that center piece ends up at 2.
Right.
And that's really what matters.
Yeah. And you can change these measurements to be anything that you want.
Yeah, they could be 1.5s and
Right.
be a 1 in center.
This is just easy math. That was really just something that was easy.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Yep. So
And here's how we problem solve, right?
everybody needs to know how to do that.
What happens if your block is too small? That means that I made my seam allowance too
Too big.
large. And so I really have two choices. I can move my needle, or I can move my fabric. I could do both, but usually,
Try to be consistent
Right.
in what you're doing, because then the next time, if you
Yes.
move the other one, that doesn't tell you how to fix it.
exactly. And so if you are moving your needle, you have to move your needle to the right in order to make a smaller
Smaller seam.
seam allowance. But if you're moving your fabric, you have to move your fabric to the left to make so it's opposite.
The other reason to keep it consistent, because was that right or left? But what was I supposed to do? So if you're always moving the same thing,
Yes.
then it's much easier in your brain.
Yes. That's Kathy. Kathy.
Yes.
I
He
do-
wants to know if you use polyester 60 weight.
I do not. So let me preface this, okay? I'm not trying to be like the thread person who says you can and cannot use a specific type of thread.
And also, there's exceptions to every thought process. So
Exactly.
That's not 100% common either.
No.
So go for it.
I typically use cotton thread. The thread that I use to piece with almost all the time is Presencia. So it is a 60 weight 3-ply thread. It's strong, it's not linty, it's very consistent, and most of the time I am actually sewing with cotton thread as well. My theory behind cotton thread and cotton fabric is that they will last the same amount of time. My thread isn't stronger than my fabric isn't stronger than my thread.
So throw it in the wash 50 million times. It's going to wear the same on
Exactly.
both sides. You won't end up with tears in your fabric or
Exactly. I've made a million bags. And the one thing that always happens, because a lot of times I'm using cotton fabric
and super
I'm
strong
using,
thread.
Yep, I'm using polyester thread. The thread rips the fabric. So over time, like the pulling and the tugging that happens, it basically it shears right through the fabric. Because I make a quilt, my intent is for it to be used and snuggled and loved, and the cat can hang out on it, whatever. So it's going to get a lot of tugging
have
and pulling
wear
and
and tear
wear
on.
on it,
Right.
and I want it to wear.
You want it to fall apart equally.
That's right. In the best possible way. I want to give it the best possible life that it can. So that is why I use the thread that I use. There are a million threads on the market. This one happens to be my favorite, and the reason that it is my favorite has to do with lint, has to do with consistency, and then again, in my seam allowance, when I use different thread that is a little bit thicker, I find that I struggle with the needle to fabric movement. It's not always as clean for me.
I have heard you say many times it doesn't take up a lot of room in my seam.
Exactly. It's
So when
almost
you
like
when
it's not
you
there.
are pressing it, you're not having to account for that extra bump
Yep.
in the seam allowance, that it presses well and shifts and moves with the fabric and everything. So, which that's all I quote with whenever where I am doing it. That
Yep.
is what my go-to, and I would agree. It's very, you don't have junk that you have to clean up. It's not constantly shedding in
Yeah.
your machine, and it definitely works very, very nice.
Because that's typically my number one complaint about cotton thread is it's very linty, it's fuzzy, it just makes a giant mess in there. And I love the Aurifil thread. I love the look of Aurifil thread. It's so pretty to look at. And when you meet the people who make Aurifil thread, they're Italian and they're so nice to talk to. You just want to buy their thread. But it's very linty for me. And so I used Aurifil thread for a very long time, but I was constantly cleaning up lint on, like, by my needle, above my needle, in my feet, and then my bobbin case was always just blown out.
Well, it's funny how many people don't think to look above their needle.
Yeah.
They look underneath and they look in the bobbin area, but they don't look up.
Yeah,
And you just
so
got this gunk just built up at
Yeah.
the top of the machine. It's like, ugh. So,
And
yes.
I'm not saying that you won't get any of that buildup
no.
with the Presencia.
Just less than you do with other.
You will get very, very much less, yes.
So, great question though. Okay, so again, adjust with your needle or moving your fabric. Try to pick one.
Yes.
You're gonna probably be happier.
That's
in the
right.
end.
And we've been on this for a while, so like you could snap a picture of that, and then the next one is what happens when it's too big, and it's basically the opposite.
Yep.
So
Imagine that.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
So again, the goal is to get that, whatever your measurements are, but the 2-inch center based on our measurements.
Yes.
That, and whichever things you need to do to make that happen.
Yeah.
So, what are some fun tools to make things better?
Exactly. So sometimes moving the needle position is the perfect ideal thing for you to do, and sometimes it's not, or sometimes it is, but you still need a little help guiding things. So I typically use the J-foot, which means J-foot doesn't come with a guide.
Right.
And so that doesn't typically work for me. But I also sew a lot of like half square triangles and things like that. And even though I have a machine that has a laser light, the laser light is usually not long enough for the...
You should buy the new machine.
I know, right? To get the diagonal on it.
We need to talk.
We need to talk, right?
Just kidding.
So, can you go to this camera for just
sure
a
can.
second? They make this, and it's really cute, and I've had one of these for years. This is, I'm way zoomed in. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can actually see it. This is a seam guide. And there are many variations of this. This one comes two ways. The picture that we showed had a little thing in the center here, like where my finger is, that had you put your needle position in there, and then you would tape it down, and then it becomes the key in order for you to like put this on. But if you use this on a bunch of different machines, the key isn't always the same. So I've always been very good about just putting it and getting it centered to wherever my needle position is, and then I lay it down. And then it's got these marks, which you can't see because it's see-through. So it's got all of these little marks on it, which help you keep your fabric straight, and you've got your diagonal seams over here. And the trick is, so even though like this is assuming here's your center needle position and then this is your 1/4 of an inch, so you can use a standard foot, but you can also offset the guide to go wherever you want, as long as you don't come...
As long as you're in that opening for
as
your
long
needle.
as your feed dogs aren't hitting that particular space. So that is one of the feed dog options.
Just to throw out there, the reason that both of us piece with our J-foot.
Yes. Oh, I have a slide for that. Yeah.
We just haven't gotten there yet.
We just haven't gotten there for it.
Okay. So, yes, I'm sure it shocks you. We do sell that here. All right. This one.
Yes.
All right. So that's what she just showed you.
Yep.
This is the one that I tend to use. I get set and then go. I find that I do really good even without this for about an hour. And then I don't know. I don't drink, so it's not that I'm drunk and I start
mesmerized.
I kind of lose focus, and I need a little guide in there to tell me
Exactly.
what what's the edge again?
Yeah.
And just to kind of refresh that. And this is nice because it's in front of the foot. So it's
Exactly.
not part of the foot. You actually have a guide in front so that before it ever gets to the needle, you're still in the right spot.
Exactly.
Because of course, by the time it gets to the needle, if you're not in the right spot, it's too late.
That's right.
So I really like this one. It screws right into your needle plate. You can adjust it. As you can see, there's a slide. So if you're using a 5/8 inch seam because you're making clothing, whatever that happens to be, you can set that and it stays right where you need it to go. So
Exactly.
I really like this one.
And if you tend to be like the type of person who pushes into your guide, you can kind of compensate for that.
You can make that adjustment if you,
yeah, make a
because
small
of course you don't want your
adjustment.
fabric bending up into the, that defeats the whole purpose.
Yep.
So it should just run right along that edge there.
Yep.
But that's the one I generally tend to use.
Multi-purpose.
Multi-purpose, absolutely.
And so for 1/4 inch feet, again, we don't use the 1/4 inch feet a ton, but some people really love them. You basically have a couple of different options. Some of them look different than these, but you basically have a metal or a plastic option, and then you have a guide or without a guide. Now, our plastic foot does not come with a guide, but some brands do make a plastic foot with a guide. The nice thing about the plastic foot is that you can definitely see your fabric riding underneath it. The negative of the plastic foot is that they break pretty easily.
It's plastic.
And I broke mine one time accidentally just putting my foot down. I just slipped on the back of the foot and the foot kind of slammed
Dropped
down.
And it hit
and
a pin or something.
I had my fabric and a pin underneath there, and it was just the right spot. So you probably will go through more plastic feet than you will metal feet.
But they are less expensive too.
They are a little less expensive. So those are basically your options. And if you go to the next slide, I have a little picture of basically this is why we don't do that. So I use the clear foot because you can clearly see through the foot.
That entire right feed dog is not under your fabric.
Right. And so we have the fabric. One thing one thing to just point out, because you can kind of see it on here, you see that we have that little marking on our throat plate. Don't use that as your 100% guide to where your 1/4 inch seam is. Sometimes I think that they were made on a Friday after a holiday party, because they're quite a bit off. And
I've never used it. The few times I tried, I'm like, yeah, that's not working. That's not for me.
Actually, once in a while, I find one that's pretty darn accurate. But
well, they also can slightly wiggle right and left.
Yeah.
Depending on your machine.
Fat line, right?
It is a really fat line.
Right?
It's like that blade width again.
Exactly. So it really can matter. Like that picture there is showing you I'm actually at the 1/4 inch mark on that foot, but I'm really on the left side of that really thick line there. So again, but the whole right feed dog has no fabric underneath there whatsoever. So
my fabric gonna feed the straightest it's ever fed, right?
Totally. Just like when you are on a unicycle, you only go straight.
That doesn't wobble at all underneath you. Not at all. So using the entire feed system gains you more probability that your fabric is going to remain straight the entire time it's being fed.
Yeah.
If you're only using part of it, there's more chance for it to twist underneath the foot.
Exactly.
And therefore, there went my perfect seam allowance.
Yeah. And a lot of times that twisting happens at the beginning and the end. So if you ever look at your fabric piece and you're like, wow, it's
How
like
did I thought I sewed a straight line.
Right. And it, we're kind of getting to the end, and then it just kind of the weight of the fabric just kind of pulls it to the left. That still can happen when you're using both feed dogs, but it's a little more controlled.
Yep.
For sure.
Yep. Is there more?
Yep.
Okay.
And then here, instead, try this. It's like our infomercial.
Right.
So this is using the regular foot. And then if you are the type of person who likes the guide, you can see in the second picture there that the guide is actually on. It sits right in front of that J foot. And then I can line my fabric up exactly where I need it to be, tighten that little adjustable seam guide.
Do you have the seam ruler in here too?
I did not.
Okay. I like to use that to position my guide.
Yes. Yeah, we showed that seam.
We showed it last week when we were talking about our favorite tools. It has all the little dots that go down, and you can use that once you get your needle, once you've done your test, you can then put your needle in that
Yep.
1/4 inch position and move your guide right into
Exactly.
the right spot so that your fabric is feeding into the proper place.
Right.
So it does defeat the purpose to use that seam guide simply to make a 1/4 inch, because that doesn't equal necessarily the 2-inch center that we've been talking about all day.
Exactly. Exactly.
So use it after you found the proper needle position.
Yes, I think there's one more.
Okay. Dun, da, da, da. Bonus! Everybody likes a good bonus, right?
Yeah. So we talked very briefly at the beginning of this about menus and how many needle positions and things like
Right.
that you have.
And how even in some machines, depending upon where you're at in the machine, it could move in a different amount when you move your needle position. Well, this is where that happens.
Yeah. So for and I love that they did this, but for whatever reason, in the quilt menu, you have some piecing stitches. And in some of those piecing stitches, you have the ability to move your needle position basically, what is it, like
It's an
an
eighth.
eighth of a millimeter versus a 1/4 of a millimeter that we have in the other places. Now, on the picture that I have here, this is what it looks like kind of in the old sewing menu. If you are in a Solaris or a Luminaire, it's actually your left-right shift button that is where you make your changes, but it still moves in the same position. That's just not the picture that I took
That was
today.
able to be, yeah. So your left-right shift, we had this conversation in class yesterday, actually, and they were like, well, how do I do that? And in a straight stitch, your width is your needle position. So whether if it's at 0, it's all the way to the left. If it's 7, it's all the way to the right. And how many increments you have in between there is how many needle positions that you have.
Yep.
But on some machines, we have a left-right shift. That's not on every machine.
No.
Left-right shift literally moves, I know it's crazy, your needle to the
position.
left or to the right.
Right.
Hence the left-right shift.
Yep.
So that is moving in all of those needle positions. You could, on some machines, move some on the width and some on the left-right shift. They will work in conjunction with each other, but then you have to add to see where you're actually at. And so,
and they're not, so the one thing that they are not consistent about, they are not consistent about what like
measurement you have available to you.
On that machine, you have left-right shift doesn't work, but width does.
But just from the real basic of that, they are the same thing.
They are
in a
the
straight
same thing
stitch.
on a straight stitch.
So whichever one works, that's one you should use. That's all that really matters.
On a stitch that has a width,
then you need to use left-right shift.
It is going to be your left-right
So
shift.
if I have a 3 millimeter zigzag,
yes,
I can't use
my
width stitch because it's going to change the width of my 3 millimeter zigzag. I have to just left-right shift the entire stitch.
Yes.
Which is why we have that key.
Exactly. That is exactly why we have it.
There you go.
And not every machine has it, but I think I was figuring electronic embroidery machines. So like I think the 6x10 style machines and bigger have left-right shift.
I think the new ones do. The old ones didn't, but the new ones I think do.
And then
I don't remember last time I sewed on one of those, so I don't remember. But
and then our larger sewing only machines, and then like everything from the 6x10 style machine and combo machine and up. So our little 500, 700, 950.
Those just have your width.
Presto, Brilliant, Lyric, Soprano, that style. They don't have left-right shift.
So you would use your width to move
That's right. And they also, even though they have piecing stitches, you do not get more needle positions on that style
There's
machine.
no actual quilting menu. The piecing stitches are part of your main utility stitch.
Right.
So you have to have the quilting menu on your machine to get that extra bump in stitch needle positions.
Yes.
So, all right. So, you had a couple of those in the boxes. If you want to show those real quick, and then we can skedaddle.
So here is, I'm going to put it on here and then maybe zoom in.
That's because there we go.
There we go. So that is the clear.
And there's a reason for clear feet, because you can see what's going on underneath.
Right. So you
can definitely see what's happening underneath the foot, which is very helpful. And it's got that little bump out the front, which is going to be your guide, even though it doesn't have a little bump out guide.
And then this is the metal version, with a guide.
Yipper.
And there are different versions of this. This is one of the wider ones. They do have some that are overall slightly smaller, but the concept is still the same. And then this is what
That's my favorite little guide.
the little seam guide looks like. It's this. And this guy screws in to the bed of your machine. And then this piece here.
So I don't know if you guys noticed, there is a little notches and markings along that slide. That's enough to get you close, but you're still going to want to make sure it's actually that distance from your needle. So awesome. So those are, let's see. Don't worry, I'll screw something up. There's still a few minutes.
There's
left.
still time.
There's still time to mess it up.
All right. I think I even got the feet in the right boxes.
Hey, look at
All
that.
right.
So long story short, a 1/4 inch is a 1/4 inch. It will always be a 1/4 inch. But the main thing is that you're taking off that out of the fabric, not necessarily that your seam actually measures to that little bit of whatever it ends up being.
Yep.
So scant, not scant, make sure that it measures out right and you'll be just fine. That's really the bottom line.
Yep.
So
Do your little sewing test and practice. I mean, practice makes perfect, and that really holds same for sewing. Sewing is like a sport that you have to sort of build muscle memory in order to do.
sure.
And the first few times you do it, it's going to feel slightly awkward. And like if you maybe you were a garment sewer before, these seams are going to
seem very small.
small.
Very
Yeah.
small after making clothing. It's like,
Oh my goodness.
how is this going to stay together?
I know, right? I know.
For sure.
And if anybody is interested in taking a quilting class, I do have a beginning quilting class, and it is virtual only, so everyone can take it. And it is
no muscle needed for the machine lifting anyways.
That's right. You will have access to it at your house, and we're going to do it on a Sunday afternoon. So like I think 1:30 to 3:30, 1:30 to 4:30, depending on how long class goes. But I'm going to take you through the prepping your fabric, mastering your 1/4 inch seam allowance, proper cutting, and then we're going to make some easy blocks, and we're going to make some complicated blocks. And then we're going to do some sashing and borders, and I'm not taking you through
The binding.
the binding and the backing and the quilting. I'll do a class in the fall specifically on that part, because that's just, then it'd have to be a long class to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun, and the pattern is super cute. And I'm working through all of the little handouts, but I'll give you guys a video so you can refer back to the individual lessons, and we'll have some handouts, and yeah, you can spend a couple of Sunday afternoons with me.
Yeah, there you go.
Have some fun.
You know, I don't want to say it's not,
There's a comment.
I don't want to say that it's not easy to do just a basic stitch, like just the straight lines. But even if you're comfortable doing that, if you look at one that's not basic and you're like, oh my God, how does this all go together? It can feel very overwhelming. So she's got a really great pattern that's going to have lots of different types of blocks being made. So I think you guys will really enjoy it for sure.
Absolutely.
And I would totally agree. Binding doesn't have to be stressful. It's all about what you know and the tools that you're using. So that's really, I totally agree, Sandra.
Yeah.
Absolutely, totally agree. For sure. All right. I think that's what we have.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us. Hopefully you got a little nugget of something in there to make your quilting life a little bit easier. Did we figure out what we're doing next? I don't think we did. We talked briefly about a couple different things, but did we decide?
Next month we're gonna.
Next week.
Next week is April.
Oh, holy crap!
Yeah.
I was thinking we had another week. What happened?
Next
What
month
happened
is
to March?
it's serger month, so we're gonna start talking about.
We're going to start
sergers.
talking about sergers, and there is also the Star Spangled Beauty release coming out. So quite a few of you have already pre-ordered. If you have not and you want to check that out We still have the bonus quilting designs for that. So it's kind of quilting related.
Yep.
And those,
Yep. And I think we're going to probably concentrate a lot on sergers next month, but maybe the month after
we can
that
go through
we'll
those. We can do, there's a different border on there.
Yep.
There's some different blocks in there. Actually, I was looking through the,
Instructions.
there's some ribbon things.
Yeah.
There's just adding lace. There's some different stuff. So maybe we'll do a little bit
Yeah, we'll
of,
do
of
some
that
of those
come May.
unusual blocks.
Sounds like
Yep.
a plan. All right. We will see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us. Bye.